Silence woke me up, not the kind that comforts you, but the kind that makes your stomach twist because you know something isn't right. I froze as soon as I stepped outside, barefoot on the icy morning concrete. A trench surrounds my property. My house was surrounded by a deep, jagged scar that was dug into the ground like a medieval moat. The dirt was piled high, fresh and damp, the air still heavy with the smell of soil. It wasn't there last night. For a moment I thought I was dreaming. My house wasn't just a home anymore. It was a prison, cut off from the world, and I knew exactly who was behind it. The HOA. They had been circling me for months, like vultures waiting for me to break. But this was something else. This wasn't about rules anymore. This was war. Before I tell you how far they went to try and destroy me, do me one quick favor. Hit that like button, because what I'm about to show you will make your jaw drop. And leave a comment below, because I want to know. Have you ever seen an HOA go this far? I didn't know it yet, but their little trench wasn't the trap they thought it was. I had been watching them the whole time. My house was more than just wooden bricks. It was a symbol. And soon, every secret, every shovelful of dirt, and every late-night whisper in the dark would return to bury them. The first real thing I had built for myself. This place carried my sweat, my time, and my pride. Every nail, every coat of paint, and every weekend I spent fixing up the yard were carried by me. It was quiet, off to the side, at the end of the cul-de-sac, away from the neighborhood's main traffic. To me, that made it perfect, peaceful, private. A place where I could finally breathe without having to follow anyone's instructions. But privacy, as I would learn, is something the HOA cannot stand. At first, it was small things. Notes taped to my door about my grass being half an inch too long. Letters in my mailbox about a non-compliant shade of paint on my shutters. I laughed them off. I thought it was just bureaucracy doing what bureaucracy does, busy work. Then the letters turned into fines. The louder knocks on my door got, and there was always one face leading the charge. Karen. That's not her real name, but it might as well have been. She was the kind of woman who carried a clipboard like it was a weapon. Always watching, always circling, always ready to strike. Her smile never reached her eyes, and her eyes never stopped looking at my property line. She told me once in that slow, deliberate tone that dripped with false kindness, "This neighborhood has rules, and rules keep us civilized. If you don't like it, this might not be the right place for you." I shrugged her off, but inside, I knew exactly what she meant. It wasn't a warning. It was a threat. Still, I tried to live my life. I kept mowing the lawn, fixing the gutters, waving at the few neighbors who hadn't yet turned cold on me. However, the tension persisted, like storm clouds gathering at the sky's edge. Every letter, every fine, every knock on the door, it was all building toward something much larger, something even worse. I wasn't prepared when it finally arrived. It started with paper. After sliding under my door, a succession of brightly colored envelopes piled up at my feet. A violation notice with a bold red stamp that looked like a scarlet letter was on each one. First it was the lawn, then the trash cans. The fence followed. There's a new reason every week, a new demand. And always, at the bottom, the number, the fine. I stopped counting after a while, but the total grew faster than I could keep up. There were hundreds, then thousands, all for things that were either fabricated or so petty no sane person would care. The neighbors began to whisper. Some people completely avoided me and turned away when I waved. Others stared with pity, like I was already halfway gone. But a few, those loyal soldiers who lived in fear of the HOA, smirked as they walked by. Clipboard Karen's disciples, who believed every word she preached. I heard her voice one night as I carried groceries from my car, sharp, low, and piercing the evening air. "He thinks he can just ignore us. However, rules are rules. We'll make him learn." She didn't mean to say that to me. She was speaking to someone in the shadows of her porch, but she said them loud enough for me to hear, on purpose. I wanted to storm across the street, to shout back, to remind her this was my home, not hers. But I didn't, because I had a feeling that this was just the beginning. The most recent letter was sticking out of my mailbox like a tongue when I opened it the following morning. This one wasn't about grass or fences or shutters. It was a disclaimer. Failing to comply will lead to additional action. There is no sign, merely the icy printed threat. I felt the silence of the neighborhood press down on me as I stood there on my porch and stared at the newspaper. That's when I realized they weren't just trying to fine me into submission. They were getting ready for a bigger event, and I had no idea what was coming. It happened overnight. The previous night had been quiet. In hindsight, it was too quiet, There are no crickets, car alarms, or barking dogs. Nothing more than a stillness that seemed to press against the windows like the air was holding its breath. When I woke up the next morning and stepped outside, I felt the ground tilt under me. My familiar world had been carved out, a valley, wide, deep, encircling my entire property like some medieval fortress. As if the earth had been harmed, the dirt was raw and wet, piled in uneven mounds along the edges. I was temporarily unable to move. My eyesight was too clear for my brain to comprehend. It didn't make sense. Why would anyone? Who would? And then the truth hit me, heavy as a stone. This was not from nature. This wasn't an accident. This was deliberate. The HOA, I felt a hot rush of anger crawl up my neck. They hadn't just fined me. They hadn't just threatened me. They had come onto my property, under cover of night, and tried to isolate me, to cut me off from the world. I walked to the trench's edge and looked down into it. It was deeper than I thought. A broken leg or worse could result from a fall into that abyss. Under my shoes, the freshly dug out edges were soft and crumbling. I imagined them circling my house like predators in the dark, shovels in hand, whispering instructions and laughing. They wanted me to feel like I was stuck. They wanted me to give up. They desired my departure. But as I stood there, staring into that scar in the earth, a strange calm settled over me. Because they had no idea, no way of knowing, that I had been prepared for them all along. Every move they made, every threat, every violation, I had it all on camera. Hidden eyes, watching. Recording, waiting. The trench wasn't their victory. It was their mistake. I shut the front door, locked it, and leaned my back against the wood, my heart pounding like a drum. Outside, the trench stood as proof of what they'd done. But inside, I had something even stronger. Evidence. When the first fines started coming in a few months ago, I knew this wasn't just bureaucracy. This was personal. And personal meant unpredictable. So I did what I always do when I sensed danger. I prepared. I set up cameras. Not just one or two. Dozens. There are tiny lenses hidden in birdhouses, under the eaves, and even in garden lights along my driveway. My property was covered from every angle, silently feeding into a secure server that the HOA was unaware of. After settling down at my desk and opening my laptop, I began watching the footage from last night. They were there. At first, it was just flashlights that floated in the night, their beams cutting through the darkness like knives. Then faces. Recognizable faces. Karen's angular profile, her lips pursed in that tight, self-righteous line. Two members of the board with shovels. Another neighbor dragging a wheelbarrow of dirt. They weren't just trespassing, they were orchestrating. I watched as they dug in shifts, whispered instructions, and used spray paint to mark the edges. They worked for hours, creating their trench like a team of ants dismantling a picnic. And the whole time, my cameras watched. I paused the video, zooming in on Karen's face. Her expression was pure satisfaction, the gleam of someone who thought they'd finally won. I almost laughed. They had no idea. Every shovel of dirt, every step across my property line, every word they spoke, I had it all, time-stamped and crystal clear. Evidence of criminal trespass, property damage, and not just harassment. As the fear left my body and was replaced by something more chilly, I leaned back in my chair. Resolve. This wasn't about surviving their attacks anymore. This was about ending them. They thought they'd dug a trench to trap me. They'd dug their own grave. I didn't sleep that night. The footage played on a loop on my screen, the glow of the monitor painting my walls in pale blue light. Every time I watched Karen's face, my resolve hardened a little more. By dawn, the fear was gone completely. It was time. I gathered the clips, every angle, every second of their trench operation. They were joined together by me into a single file. Dates, timestamps, faces, actions. Even the whispered conversations were clear enough to make your skin crawl. And then I sent it. To the HOA, not. To Karen, not. To all other people. The office of the county sheriff, the local news station, and each and every house in the neighborhood. Within hours, my inbox lit up. Shocked neighbors. Sarcastic messages. People who had stayed silent suddenly speaking out. The narrative had changed. The HOA was no longer a group that enforced rules. They were vandals, trespassers, criminals. By noon, 2 patrol cars rolled down our cul-de-sac, lights flashing. They parked across from Karen's house, where she stood frozen on the porch, her clipboard hanging at her side like a dead weight. I watched from my window as deputies walked up her steps. One showed her the video on a tablet. I could see the color disappear from her face even from a distance. She tried to talk, to explain, to shift the blame, but it was no use. They had dug the trench. They had gone too far. The line was now biting back. Following her were the board members who had joined her. One by one, they were questioned, cited, some even escorted off their property, their power. The power they had wielded over me for months evaporated under the weight of their own actions. The neighborhood was buzzing now, phones ringing, doors opening, people staring out their windows at the chaos they had once cheered for. And me? My hidden cameras were still rolling as I sat back in my chair, documenting my enemy's defeat. The trap had been removed. The world around me changed like tectonic plates when the cameras started rolling on them, and that was just the beginning. What had been whispered in porches and passed in clipped letters became a headline, a scandal, a thing people pointed at and shook their heads over. However, exposure alone was insufficient. I wanted them taken apart piece by piece so they could never wield the quiet authority they had used to terrorize me again. It began small and surgical. I printed the timestamps, the screenshots, the exact minutes when the shovels struck my lawn. I made a packet for the county attorney. Trespass, property damage, conspiracy to intimidate. The State Housing Oversight Board received another packet. I sent a sharper, different packet to the homeowner who had laughed in my face the week before. His own signature captured on cam, admitting they'd make an example of me. That one got forwarded to his employer. Then I did something even the cameras hadn't quite captured. I told people the story in a language they understood. Human language, not legalese or HOA jargon. In the neighborhood group chat, I posted the footage with a single line. This happened to my home at 2:12 a.m. on June 3rd. These are the people who think they can decide who belongs here. The clip spread faster than I expected. Screenshots of Karen's face with a half smile and a smug grin were sent from one phone to another and ended up in the inboxes of people who had previously signed her petitions. At the emergency board meeting that Karen had called to save face, I walked in with a folder and a steady breath. The room was packed. Neighbors, 2 local reporters, the sheriff's deputy who had been kind enough to come again. I placed the folder on the table and said simply, "You dug a trench around my house. I have the proof. What you did was criminal." Karen's face, once so composed, twitching, a cartoon slowly unraveling. She tried the old tactic. Deflection, a practiced smile, misunderstanding, the same lies she'd told me through a dozen letters. However, there were now voices behind me from people who had viewed the footage and were ashamed of their silence. One by one, they stood and spoke. Some expressed regret. One neighbor who had helped shovel, his hands still sore from the work, begged for forgiveness in front of cameras. It was small, messy, human. She was crushed by it. The county didn't just issue the HOA a fine and move on. They started looking into it. The board members were removed pending review. Karen's name, tied to the dig and to a pattern of intimidation dating back years, became a public record. Her employer received a respectful, neutral letter detailing the facts, and then another, angrier wave of messages from clients who didn't want to be associated with someone who'd orchestrated property damage and harassment. She was asked to leave a volunteer position she had held for years within weeks. Pride is a fragile emotion. However, the paperwork was not the sweetest part. It was a reversal ceremony. The trench that had been meant to isolate me became a stage. The county ordered it filled, and the men who dug it were photographed shoveling the same dirt back over the scar in the ground, under the glare of lights and cameras. The news vans came and their lenses caught the exact moment the first scoop of dirt fell back into place. The trench closed like a curtain over their plan in the cinematic shots. Clapping began slowly and then got louder. Neighbors who wanted to be on the right side of the story were among those who came to fill the void on their own. There were hearings. Restitution orders called for money to pay for the damage, legal fees, and cleaning up the mess they had made. Payments were scheduled. As that paper trail developed into a map of the consequences, I observed, the allies of Karen kept their distance. In letters to the county, former supporters requested rule modifications and oversight. The HOA board itself was reconstituted with members who had no taste for vigilante justice. They saw humiliation as a gradual dismantling rather than a show of vengeance. Karen's voice, once amplified by a board's authority, diminished once more. Fewer people attended her meetings, fewer people nodded, and more awkward silences. She now passed by my house with her eyes down, shoulders tense, and the clipboard omitted as if by default. I could see it. She tried once to approach me on the street, to say she was sorry. I gave her a few sentences to say, because watching someone try to get over their shame gave her a strange, empty dignity. Then I walked on. That day, I only said, "You built this yourself," and that was it. But revenge, as I would learn, is not only about public retribution. It is private too. Some nights, as I sat with a steaming mug and watched footage of them digging, I felt a cool satisfaction that wasn't as cruel as a smile, but more like a storm coming to an end. I had not smashed anything. I had not intentionally humiliated anyone. The law did the rest because I had given truth a place to stand. When everything settled, there was a quiet restitution. The fines paid, the board made changes, new rules passed, clearer oversight, better channels for disputes, stricter penalties for unlawful actions. Most importantly, there was a guardrail around what the HOA could and could not do. Power loses its appetite for cruelty when it is visible and accountable. On the morning they filled the trench, a neighbor I'd barely known handed me a paper cup of coffee and said gently, "I'm sorry we didn't see it sooner." I used both hands to take the cup. I tasted the bitterness and the warmth and felt something like peace settle into me. Revenge had a sweetness, yes, but it was tempered now by the knowledge that the price exacted had left marks on everyone. Some would recover, some might not. The following day I walked through my yard and felt the firm soil beneath my boots where the trench had been. After being torn apart by hate, it once again appeared normal, or as normal as anything appeared to be. I felt the familiar grooves of splintered wood under my palm as I ran my hand along the fence. Fences, flower beds, and truss needed to be fixed, but they could be fixed with time and effort. The part that had been harder to repair, the invisible feeling of being hunted, had been addressed as well. Not erased, but acknowledged and countered. They had tried to scare me out of the neighborhood. Instead, they taught me how to stand my ground. They had wanted me to fold, and instead they made me stronger in ways I didn't know I needed to be. They had given me a roadmap to return to my life, in addition to recording a crime with the cameras that had watched them dig that night. That marked the end of the retaliation. Not a spectacle of cruelty, but rather a reclamation. The trench is now gone. Filled, smoothed over, grass already beginning to push through the dirt as if the earth itself wanted to heal faster than I did. From the street, you wouldn't know what happened here. The scars, sleepless nights, and fear that once hung like a storm cloud over my roof would not be visible to you. But I see it. Every time I look out my window, I remember. I remember the flashlights cutting through the night, the scrape of shovels, the laughter of people who thought I was powerless. And I remember the moment that laughter turned to silence, when the evidence I'd gathered became their undoing. The HOA wanted to isolate me. They wanted to bury me under fines, threats, and intimidation. Instead, they dug their own grave. And that's the thing about control. It only works if you let it. The moment you stop being afraid, the moment you shine a light on the darkness, their power crumbles. Do I feel satisfied? Yes. Do I feel better now? Not completely. Because revenge isn't a clean victory, it's messy. It leaves echoes. But it gave me back what they tried to steal. My dignity, my home, my right to stand here without bowing my head. Now when I walk my yard at night, I don't feel fear anymore. Something sharper and more steady is there. Strength. And if you take anything from my story, let it be this. Don't let them scare you. They can't control you. They should not decide when you've had enough, because the truth is always stronger than their lies. Before I close this chapter, do me one quick favor. Hit that like button if you stood with me through this battle. Drop a comment below and tell me, what would you have done if you woke up to a trench around your home? Also, don't forget to subscribe because I have more stories to tell, and I promise they won't stop getting crazy from here on out. This was how I fought, my gully, my revenge, and now it's my peace.